Salutations, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. I'm on Sloane Square and I'm about to walk down the King's Road, Chelsea. So this is one of the smartest areas of London. So Sloane Square, it gave its name to Sloanes, people who were supposed to congregate around here in the late 70s, early 80s. I suppose they're a more modern version of bright young things, fashionable, wealthy people who were perhaps not very bookish. And this place is also associated with not associated with ambulances, associated with shishi shopping, okay? High-end shopping of the slightly more showy kind. You see Boggi behind me, that Italian fashion label. Oh, I really abominate motorbikes. But anyway, there's Peter Jones, school outfitters extraordinaire. I used to go there quite a lot. Peter Jones, the shop, actually, not the man. So going on, there's the King's Road, and that's what I really want to show you today, is the King's Road. It being a Sunday morning, it's not too busy. So when I was an adolescent in the 90s, the King's Road was the place to be seen. I was deeply unfashionable here, so I wasn't here very much. But I've got the floppy hair for it, you know, finally cultivated that. And, well, I'm not sure, it's a bit difficult to show you from this angle. Yeah, red trousers, okay, de rigueur. Well, actually, red trousers only come in the last 10 years. So, the King's Road, well, it was built in the reign of King Charles II, and so you could get from London to Kew Palace. And Kew is several miles down the river, and it's just south of the River Thames, in the borough of Richmond upon Thames. Of course, that was considered outside London in those days. That was the county of Surrey. Obviously, Surrey still exists, but in 1889, a lot of land was taken off Surrey and was added to London when Greater London was created. So it was Pride yesterday. That's why they got these rainbow symbols for gay pride. But so back to the King's Road, with all these Italian couturiers here. Massimo Dutti. I think I had one of his shirts. Thanks, Max. I didn't realize he did ladies wear as well. But anyway, so because the roads were in a very poor state back then, obviously the Romans had built roads, and they hadn't built any for centuries after that. They were still using them. The Romans built them so well, they were usable well over 1,000 years after the Romans had departed these shores. So more roads had to be built, which is obviously very costly and time-consuming, back-breaking labour. Made the army do it, sometimes convicts do it. In the Middle Ages, peasants had to do it la corvée, unpaid road work. France had that going until the Revolution of 1789. So King Charles with his coach and four would be thundering down this road at all hours. Otherwise it'd be rather dangerous to be around here because it was a swampy area near the Thames. There were a lot of tussocks and so on, hillocks and dells, and in these undulations footpads could hide out. Footpads as in they were armed criminals on foot, as in not on horses, to waylay people and sequester them, but more likely simply robbing them of their goods, your money or your life. But there might be knights of the road as well, as in highwaymen, as in they're on horses, mask their face of their wise and say your money or your life. But what else about them? So some people had a certain respect for these people because they met their victims face to face. They rarely killed their victims, which actually, ethics aside, was a foolish thing. You ought to have killed them because the penalty for robbery or even grand larceny was death until the 1820s. So it was just the same as the penalty for murder. So if you murder your victim, well, there's no witness against you. So you greatly increase your chance of getting away. And if you are apprehended, the penalty you will suffer for murder is no greater than the penalty you'll suffer for robbery. Therefore, you might as well kill them to give you've got a much better chance of getting away with it, and you don't suffer any more if you are caught in the end. But actually, they were relatively merciful considering. So obviously be accompanied by plenty of soldiers. No one would ever dare rob the king. It would be more than your life was worth. They'd raise a hue and cry, get every able-bodied man to try and hunt you down. So then some VIPs, friends of the king, were allowed to use it as well. So you go to Kew Gardens, the splendid Royal Botanical Gardens, dating from that time, with various houses. I don't know if you call it the warm house or whatever, the tropical greenhouse, the treetop walk, and there's obviously the King's house, The Hanoverians like to spend a lot of time there, or Alexander Pope even composes ditty to put on the collar of the king's hound, saying, I am His Majesty's dog at Kew, pray sir, whose dog are you? You can go into that. So there's a lot of Queen Anne architecture around here with that dark red stone. What else about that place in Kew? Spelt K-E-W, but pronounced Q, like the letter Q. What else was I going to point out about that? Anything else? Of course, you could go down the Thames, and the Thames is a bit of a highway. It's often sometimes faster to go by boat than it was to go by land, but you had to depend on the tides, because the Thames is tidal as far down as Teddington. That's further than Kew, so the tide might be going against you at the time you wish to travel, depending on which direction you're going. And the other thing to bear in mind about going down there is, sometimes the water might be very low, there might be too many boats there, things like that, and the river was quite filthy because it was an open sewer. It was only 1860s when they started to have proper sewage and pipe all the effluent well out of London. So perhaps you're getting a taste for the King's Road, and in 1830 it was open to the public. It had been a toll road until that time, these things privately maintained, the big toll gates, toll booths, so cover 24 hours guarded, and that also started to keep the highwaymen and the footpads away, so you can use it. You come along usually in your coach and four, if you're a wealthy person. If you're somewhat wealthy, you have a horse, and ordinary people, that's the majority of us, will simply walk. I'm not sure if you're allowed to walk for free, possibly, and say, so get out, pay the toll, and be allowed to go ahead. But also a very wealthy person would have someone on the back of the coach jump off, run ahead to pay, or more likely a horseman ahead to pay, so it would just be open, they wouldn't have to stop, they'd just speed on through. So we're passing the Duke of York's ground, as in this is for the Territorial Army, that's the part-time army. There was a wall there for years, demolished not so long ago. The Duke of York is a title given to the younger son of the British monarch, or the second son usually. It's been reissued many times. For some reason it never seems to last. The current Duke of York is Prince Andrew, that's the Queen's second son. Territorial Army is a part-time army. There have been all sorts of part-time armies through the centuries. It's known as a territorial force for the First World War. Not quite sure when you go to Territorial Army after that. So you do your ordinary job as a bus driver, a butcher, a baker, a teacher, or whatever, an insurance clerk, and then 1 weekend a month you do military training, and then on top of that you do a 2-week camp at some point in the year. If there is a war or a likelihood of a war, you can be called away from your ordinary job and do your military duties. They've been sent to Afghanistan and Iraq and so on. And sometimes they can volunteer to go for these things, sometimes they're called up anyway. Often they're ex-soldiers who've done 5 years or 10 years or whatever in the army and then choose to carry on. So I think reserves and the Territorial Army are exactly the same. Some of them have never been full-timers. And by law, you must be given your job back when you go away, because the army could call you up for years. If it was a full-scale war, you must be given your job back at the same salary, at the same position when you return. And some businesses claim to support it out of sheer patriotism, or maybe thinking that they get worthwhile people to work for them because of this, and these people develop useful skills which have crossover in civilian life and things like that. So it's pleasingly low rise for the most part, 3 or 4 stories, and it's not all samey, okay? Different colours, but usually not too jarring, the architecture. A little bit of green space, there's a synagogue off that way. That Duke of York ground, it made me call to mind how Richard Tomlinson used to train there. Richard Tomlinson, that British spy who went rogue. He's working for MI6, that's the United Kingdom's external intelligence agency, going out and spying on other countries. He was an officer for them, not an agent, as in he's mostly here in London and he's running agents abroad, because what you want is agents inside your target organisation. You want, let's say, a Russian army officer to be giving intelligence to the UK. You want a Pakistani intelligence officer, for instance, to be giving information to the UK. You'd like to say a Chinese politician or whatever to be giving information to the United Kingdom. So they're the agents, who are usually foreign nationals inside other organisations or governments, whereas an officer is British and is mostly here. But anyway, Richard Tomlinson recalled how, I think it's the late 80s, where he's working for some company in the financial sector, which he found deathly dull, but for a bit of the spice of life, he joined the Territorial Army. Wouldn't have been my bag, and had to go there to the Duke of York barracks to get in, and want to get in the Territorial Army SAS, and said, so we get into this battered old rusting bus with a leaking roof, and one rainy Friday evening, be driving down the King's Road past the pubs, which are absolutely jam-packed with people on leisure bent, these revellers chatting, smoking and quaffing ales, and we'd be headed to a remote hillside in Wales to be rained on all night and beasted and whatever, and made to run to various points up on top of hills carrying heavy rucksacks. Not my bag. Okay, I'm not into suffering. He is, obviously, but he got into the Territorial Army SAS, which some people think, well, is that faintly pathetic? Because, okay, so we're behind enemy lines doing a super dangerous mission, but we got to be back in the office by 9 o'clock on Monday. Anyway, I certainly couldn't do it, and they could be used in a real war. I think they have to reach the same standard of fitness. Very, very hard to get into. So, perhaps you've got the idea of the kind of things they sell here on the King's Road. Probably not super expensive. They're not as much so as, say, Bond Street, for example. That'd probably be the most expensive shopping area, or some bits of Knightsbridge, and Knightsbridge only about a mile and a half behind, crossing over here. So, prêt à manger, as in ready to eat. These places are ubiquitous in the British Isles. Been around here for 20 years. I always accidentally call it prêt à porter, as in that film from about 1995, that sort of send up of the fashion industry. Look at Petit Bateau, like it's a French, well, high street fashion label. I think it does children's clothes quite a lot. So the people who shop around here, well, they're, they're not very young usually. They're sort of, I'd say over 25 to 55 kind of, obviously above average income, quite fashion conscious, quite into health as well. As you might see, there's not that much junk food around. Anyway, it's dead flat, but there's no cycle lane, unfortunately. So, King's Road would be a place to visit for me. I've occasionally bumped into my former pupils here. Ooh, I must go cycling at some point. And quite a few writers used to live around here. I'm getting that scent of summer, that heady aroma of flowers, but sometimes when the petals fall to the ground and begin to rot pleasingly, even as though they're corrupting, the fragrance is actually very serene. So, yet more boutiques. Okay, so not my thing. Anyway, we're not very far from the Thames. The Thames is that away. Thames is maybe about half a mile at one point. Then obviously we're not quite parallel to the Thames, and the Thames isn't absolutely straight, meanders a little bit, so it gets a bit further from us. And there's the Royal Hospital Chelsea. I've never been into it, to my shame. One of the few things I've never been into, but you'll sometimes see these Chelsea pensioners, as they're called, around here, wearing these very elderly men. So these geriatrics in these scarlet-coloured tunics, and wearing these black tricorn hats, like something out of the 18th century. And they're always very well turned around, toddling around, wizened little old men. They're never obese, I've noticed. Anyway, they're old soldiers, and one of the things they can get, I think, in lieu of a pension, is they get to live in the King's Hospital at Chelsea. Or the Royal Hospital at Chelsea. But it's using a hospital in the more old-fashioned sense of not an infirmary in this case, but a place for a place of charity. So it's like a retirement home, an old folks home. I think they have to be all bachelors, or actually in many cases widowers. So they get their personal care, they get their bed and board and all the rest of it. And I think they have very little stipend, very little money to live off. That's the deal. The sense of companionship. So they're known as Chelsea pensioners, and they've been around here since, as I say, around about 1700. And there's a chapel you can go in to visit. It's very close to the National Army Museum for reasons that you might guess. And look at this for a lovely square. Rather quiet as well. So the one thing is, we're not very near a tube station. There's Victoria's tube station, or Sloane Square tube station's a bit closer, or Pimlico. But Pimlico's got Pimlico tube station, but apart from that, it's a bit lacking in tube connections. Reminds me of that Ealing comedy, that late 1940s film, Passport to Pimlico. So after the Second World War, there were shortages of just about everything. And the people of Pimlico decided, oh, well, we know what we'll do, because we don't want it to be on ration books, and we can't get enough coal, clothing is rationed and so on, petrol's rationed, very few people had cars, but okay, we'll secede, we'll become an independent country. So Pimlico becomes an independent country. I think that'll improve their lot. It's sort of about a 1 square mile area, quite close to the centre of London, but they give up after a while. I don't quite see the joke myself, but anyway, what a drollery. 1940s humour, rather different, but how humour, well, some of it's timeless and some of it is very, extemporaneous. Or is that the word? No. Ephemeral. And it just doesn't last They say all politics is local. I think that was a Tip O'Neill thing. But some comedy is local, some is universal. People just wouldn't get the cultural references. But I'm quite able to recycle comedy sometimes and adapt it to different countries. Anyway, so a few eateries around here. Is that a really naff phrase? I mean, it seems like a 90s Valley Girl thing to say. Carphone Warehouse. Okay, it's nothing to do with cars, despite that. Not quite sure what they call it that. Remember in the 80s when I first saw mobile phones, they were huge, the size of a shoebox, and usually you could only carry them in the car, needed to be plugged into the car. That was the idea, use them in the car, not carry them around with you. They weren't really mobile phones. Okay, ooh. We're passing over to where R.L. Travers lived. I don't know very much about this Australian, as in author of Mary Poppins. Bet you didn't guess she was an Australian. Obviously made into that famous Hollywood film of the mid-60s, starring Dick Van Dyke, who plays chimney sweep. And it's because that was the era they still had song and dance routines in most of these films. And Dick Van Dyke, he obviously had to be a Cockney, as a working class Londoner, and he notoriously murdered the Cockney accent. He did the worst ever impression of a Cockney accent ever, which obviously reminds me of the old lesson, if you cannot do an accent properly, don't attempt it at all. So it'd be far better to say, just put one line in the film saying, he's an American who's living in London, fine, and then he can speak in his ordinary accent, and everybody's happy. It doesn't matter to the story what his nationality is, but it does matter to the film very much that he tried to do the Cockney accent and failed abysmally. It was sort of unwittingly hilarious. I don't know how on earth they let it go out like that. But that's Mary Poppins, but despite that, it's fantastic. There's a nanny agency called Mary Poppins, well known in France, even to this day, that film I've discovered. Okay. So I remember some sort of bag I was carrying long ago. My French people tell me it was like a Mary Poppins bag, not a handbag. Okay, Marks and Spencer. We used to know them as Marks and Sparks. So King's Road, trying to find something a little bit more appealing. So as you get further down, it's not as plush as it was. You follow all the way, you end up almost at Putney Bridge, but then it's no longer the King's Road, changes to something else when you're getting into Brompton or Parsons Green, that area. Look at that for a splendid house with a quadriga. The chariot and 4 horses. If I knew more about classics, I'd be able to identify the figures. Oh yeah, and look at this here. Simit Saraya. This Turkish bakery thing, as in Seed Palace. That's what it means. Notice how they've taken the word from Greek for seed. Ooh, American vintage. Never heard of this brand before. Look at that. And then over there, branch of Waterstones bookshop, like that very distinguished comedian Benji Waterstones, but he's nothing to do with the bookshop. So I'm surprised I haven't seen more rainbow flags everywhere because of Pride. So it seemed like everybody's jumping on the bandwagon. I found it a bit tedious myself. I think, okay, so 1972 was the first gay pride march here in the United Kingdom. I remember having to walk past the 2012 one, and there's some people walking right at the front of the march carrying this big banner saying 1972 veteran. And these people who've been doing it for 40 years, well, when they started in the early 70s, now that took valor. If you were seen doing that, you could be sacked from your job, and that would be entirely legal to sack somebody in the early 70s for that kind of thing. Because although it was legal from 1967 in England and Wales, it was very much disapproved of. Okay, so those people, they were gallant in standing up for what they wanted back then, but especially some sort of middle-aged or even elderly people who are involved now say, where were you in the 70s or the 80s when it was really difficult for them? Okay, oh no, right, you can change your mind, and perhaps not everyone's that brave, not everyone's willing to suffer the consequences of joining an unfashionable cause. Now kind of it's the other way around, and the people who say anti-gay stuff, they're the ones who get in trouble. Not that I'm saying that's an ethical cause. So I don't want anyone to be mistreated for being gay or straight or anything like that, but I think this virtually mandatory celebration of it, I think that's a little overdone. I don't object to it. You want to go to march, I'm not stopping you. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. That makes you happy, go knock yourself out. But I don't wear one of those pride ribbons or badges myself. I think they're mostly straight people who go along, I suppose, just for the fun. Oh, so pleasingly quiet. Whose helicopter is that? Not mine. Five Guys. This opened up just a couple of years ago. Quite good actually for junk food, if I can call it that. Relatively quality food. Tasting quite delectable. So perhaps is it just too typically corporate high street with Starbucks and all the other usual brands there? Yeah. So an art gallery. I knew somebody who worked in an art gallery, not this one. He said it was very difficult because you've got to sell. The cost of renting the space is huge, and you have to have a prestige address, or you're not going to have the right sort of clientele. The thing is, so you really want people to buy, but you don't want to hard sell too much. You'll scare them off. And we can't be seen to be doing nothing. There we are. Okay, so way more boutiques. And then Waitrose, one of the posher supermarkets selling tofu and that kind of thing. I don't think they have a Whole Foods here, because Whole Foods opened in 2007 at a high street Kensington. They're in Richmond and various other places. So Whole Foods is very pricey, well, like 3 times the price of ordinary food, but it's very healthy. It's all organic. It's not a sterile shopping experience, and it's not sort of packaged, and you can get the smell of it, and it just seems so uberous and appealing, so natural. It just gives you a very alluring image of the food. And so eco-toffs are the people who buy it, as in they're posh people who care about the environment. But all right for them, because it, prices other people out. Oh, look, see, Wimbledon's on, which I got that. I don't know what that means. What language is that going to mean? Like l'été would be summer, but there we are. The cinema. What are they doing to the cinema? The Curzon Cinema, as in Marquis Curzon of Kedleston, I suppose. Okay. Ooh, ad hoc. Yes. Some nice, trashy lingerie. Okay. Rings my bell. And this Chelsea Methodist Church, we're going to see all these turquoise, what would you call them, mosaics. It seems to be sparsely attended, to say the least. There's a Catholic church around here somewhere. There's, of course, the compulsory Anglican church. Café de la Paix. Ooh. I might have to, but it's one of those Turkish places, despite the name, it seems to me. One of the good things about the Turks is they really have no hesitation in selling pork or alcohol. A Kuwaiti cafe here, wow. So a lot of Arabs come here to London because a hot day here is just ideal for them. Knightsbridge is where the wealthier Arabs tend to live like Qataris and Saudi Arabians, and the Arabs from countries that are not quite so prosperous like Iraq and Syria living more on Edgware Road. Dozens of Arab cafes and restaurants there. You could easily get by only speaking Arabic in that area. So we're coming up to Chelsea Town Hall. And there was the Grenfell fire. My goodness, it was June 2017. It was days after Theresa May just about won that general election. Had that fire happened just before the election, the result of the election might well have been different. But anyway, some people came here because that was in the borough of Kensington and Chelsea, the royal borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and they occupied some of the offices here. You can also get married here if you're having a civil wedding, the registry office, and that's why you'll sometimes see some confetti that people have strewn on the floor. Okay, and look at this for a handsome clock up high. There we go. And the window boxes, well, that does it for me. Now, I'm seeing Metro Bank over there, which is open on a Sunday. I never quite get its business model, because all other banks are closing branches, saying move online and save the cost, because these things cost like easily £1 million to set up a branch. But okay, it's customer service. I like the idea. I'm a bit old-fashioned. I want to speak to a human, but Metro Bank has been spreading through the country for 10 years now. It's an American thing. And somehow they're at least surviving. Okay, so Chelsea Old Town Hall. Where's the new Town Hall? I'm not quite sure. So we're still on the King's Road. It's fairly long. And I've been blithering away for ages. So further up here, there is some hospital or other, Charing Cross Hospital, because we're not actually at Charing Cross Hospital. Charing Cross Hospital moved out from Charing Cross decades ago. Charing Cross Hospital was where Bruce Reynolds was born in September 1931, someone who I find perennially fascinating. But when he was born, Charing Cross Hospital really was in Charing Cross. That's a few miles east of here. So a lot of hospitals, they bear a certain name, but they're not actually in their original location that the name indicates. Okay, so Spanish butcher, nice. Upset all the vegetarians, seeing the meat in the fridge. And then a former graveyard where they've torn down the wall. You and non-you, okay? It's non-you to say cemetery. You're trying too hard, you bourgeoisie, even though that's what I am. So maybe I'm trying too hard by not saying cemetery. Look at that. Old Nick up there, or Pan, or someone, whoever. Nice. The Ivy. The Ivy. Is it Gordon Ramsay owns this chain of upmarket restaurants? He's a bit of a douche myself. He's got several children, never changed a nappy, so feminists wouldn't like him. Can't think of what else about him. Hell's Kitchen, he started all these. He was notoriously foul-mouthed and abusive towards his staff, said to put people off. So he's sort of the bully's version of Jamie Oliver. Not too keen on Jamie Oliver, but he is at least pleasant to people. Okay, look at these little goats. And then we're going to come up to the fire station there. Memorial to some of the firemen here who gave their lives in the Second World War trying to save people around here. Okay, and is it safe to cross over? Looks like it is. And then Oakley Street down there, down towards the River Thames. This obviously is well out of sight, the Thames, I'm afraid. And there's a Catholic church in that direction. So this is where it seems to be not so special on that side. I wonder if that sort of bomb fell in the Second World War or something, but rather special on the other side. I'll take a look now. Because you can even see some sort of map online of London where all the bombs fell, and I mean all the bombs, and that'll explain why you have radically different architecture on the same street, like cheek by jowl. It's not entirely due to bomb damage. Sometimes it's a case that they didn't appreciate 19th century architecture. In the mid-20th century, so none of these things were torn down. Seems like a crime to us now, demolishing heritage, which was very fine, and replacing it with something which is as bland as can be. This would be a case in point. Not actually ugly, but I wonder what stood there before. I suspect it was something rather more alluring than that. How about that? That's very enticing, hey? Pig to make the boys wink. So some hijabi women in there taking their 11s. My old Dutch pancakes. The tallest people in the world with their tulips. How do they manage to be slim when they have all that fattening stuff, that Gouda or whatever? Hollandaise sauce. Beer. Heineken, you know, that's a Dutch make. So anyway, it gets a bit more bohemian down the end. Okay, King's Road will be more street than road, if you see what I mean. Now, when are we going to get on to the interesting bit? So, now punks used to hang around here in the 60s and be trying to charge people like £2 to take photos of them, Japanese tourists. Well, loads of Japanese tourists back then. Now, of course, it's Chinese, you scarcely ever speak about Japan. So this punk movement started here in the 70s. With the Sex Pistols, who were perhaps the most notorious exponents of punk culture. So wearing their hair very long in the middle, you know, cutting it into a mohawk and dyeing it pink, green, all sorts of wacky colours, all sorts of facial piercings, tattoos, wearing leather drainpipe jeans, bobber boots, boys and girls just the same, heavy makeup for girls, obviously into drugs and kind of rejecting normality, conformism and so on. Now I'm a bit of a non-conformist myself, but the punk culture is not one that attracts me. But I think there's nothing more pathetic than an aging punk. They had to grow out of it. Even Johnny Rotten, he's the one who survived John Lydon. I think it's Sid Vicious, the one who committed suicide when he murdered his girlfriend. I remember the early 80s seeing some punks coming up to my sister when she's little, offering her some stuff. But what else is there down there? Well, we'll see if this doesn't run out. It's been going for ages, about the World's End. So I hate to be spoiling it for you. And where Vivienne Westwood had her shop, some sort of fashion boutique called Sex, things like that. I think it might have been going on just a little bit too long. And sometimes it's just too samey, the King's Road. But I thought if you'd never been to London, you might appreciate this tour of the King's Road. So many pubs and restaurants, but we got some upholsterers here and places to buy your furniture. And then we get eventually to charity shops. It's not quite so expensive. So the World's End, I'm not quite sure. Well, oh yeah, that was the marshy area, as I say, that was infested by armed robbers long ago. I suspect that's why it's called the World's End, and there's the World's End pub right down the end, which is not open all that much. I remember going in to a pub nearby there first few days of January, and it was sort of an identifiably Cockney pub, and all but one person was white, which is neither bad or good, just very unusual these days. It seemed, you know, like the English working class in London have almost disappeared. People are English, and I'm not. They tend to be upper class, maybe middle class. Not many of them are really working class anymore, because a lot of the so-called English people are not actually English, are like partly Irish, Scots, Welsh and so on. Now this is more what I'm talking about, a bit alternative, coming down to this end of Chelsea, okay? Wow, look at that crystal skull. Scary, hey? Peruvian connection shop over there. Okay, so past the Italian kitchen. And obviously a lot of these things are boarded up, but I'm not sure we're actually going to get all the way down to show you what I want to show you. I'm thinking perhaps sometime I should switch it off and show you on another occasion. So the Big Easy, where is that? Is that Chicago? There used to be a nightclub down here in the late 90s called the Leopard Lounge. I only went there once, I don't know if it still exists. What else about King's Road? I can't think. So, yeah, there were lots of like second-hand clothes shops, second-hand bookshops, charity shops. But that was sort of like the nerve centre of the counterculture in the late 60s into the 70s, I suppose into the 80s. Still hasn't quite died. But the thing is, it's become so gentrified. it's just too expensive. Like these tower blocks near the World's End, that World's End estate. And time was you would have been considered poor to live there. But Margaret Thatcher in 1980 brought in this right to buy thing, which the Conservatives have been talking about since 1974. It was in their manifesto and said if you've been a council tenant for more than 3 years, you'll be able to buy your council flat or council house at an advantageous rate. And of course that was very appealing to many proletarian voters who could never have envisaged buying their house otherwise, and some of them voted Conservative as a thank you to her. But then that really depleted the social housing stock, and these people sold on, and it was sold on and on. And so the real cost of housing, as in real terms, since 1980 is something like 5 times higher. So a lot of people on ordinary incomes have been priced out of central London. They have to live miles away. Think, how do they cope? So obviously housing takes a much bigger chunk of people's income here than it did when I was a toddler. I think about where we used to live, Kensington, in the early 80s, and that would be just unimaginable now. You have to be a multi-millionaire to live there now. We were just an ordinary middle-class family. So we're coming onto Beaufort Street, which leads to a bridge. Yes, take my life in my hands, I can cross over. And that's the bridge to the south of the Thames. We're north of the Thames, just in case you didn't know. We're quite close to where Thomas More lived, Saint Thomas More, Sir Thomas More, the same person, the Lord Chancellor, who famously was executed because he refused to say that Henry VIII was the head of the church, because Thomas More believed that the Pope was the head of the church. Thomas More remained a Roman Catholic to the day he died, and he paid with his life for his faith. He was a sincere man. There was a bad side to him, obviously, authorising the torture of Protestants in an earlier era when Henry VIII was a Roman Catholic too. But unlike so many people, he was not a time server. He would not be shifted. So he lived very close to here. And there's a Thomas More Catholic church close to here. His actual house doesn't stand, it's on the site that it was. Look at this. This is meant to be mock Tudor. Not done that well, actually. Okay, so we're finally getting down to a bit more I was talking about. You can tell it's really rough because there's a Conservative club here. Anyway, King's Road is about 2 miles long, and then it obviously goes through another area on into Parsons Green, which is also quite a plush area, quite a yuppie area to be living. And then there are some tower blocks down here, but I didn't really spoil the effect. Some are right overlooking the Thames, so I'll be elated to get to live there. Okay, so people like to have Chelsea in the name of whatever it is they're doing. So this Kensington and Chelsea constituency, represented by Michael Portillo for a long time. I can't remember who it was before that. Obviously, Alan Clark. When I was an adolescent, I absolutely idolised him, wanted to model myself on him. Now we're coming to the Moravian Church. Moravia as in what's in the Czech Republic. So in the Reformation, some Moravians became Protestants, and that was that. There's a Moravian church, there's only one in Belfast. I've been there, I've only once in my life seen that gate open. And so I made a point of cycling around, and there's a little church building, a little graveyard in there. There's some school children wandering around. That's that. Anyway, I might switch it off now because I just have to go too far. Opium, oh my goodness. I don't think they actually sell opium. Okay, furniture from India. And look at this for more modern art style furniture. Shows what I know about aesthetics. Absolute zilch. Okay, some of these charity shops here. All these second-hand things. Cancer Research UK. You can tell it's not quite so expensive. Oh, look at that. For some post-war architecture. Built in a haste. And here we're coming to the World's End. Look at this clock going backwards, going super fast. Oh my word, isn't it zany? What a real mindfuck. Okay, and you can tell people aren't too wealthy because there's a laundrette, because if you can't afford your own washing machine, you have to come here to do it. Anyway, so this area, it starts to become known as the World's End, and over that away, there are these brown tower blocks. They're built to replace some slum housing right after the Second World War, but I think they've aged quite well actually. Anyway, still some very handsome houses over there. There's such a glare. Looking at the screen, I can't see anything. It's really just white. But with the naked eye, well, it's as clear as day. So that's just about enough from here, and I think I probably won't get quite down to the World's End pub to where Auntie Vivienne had her shop, Sex, and a few other boutiques like that. So I hope you have enjoyed your whistle-stop tour of the King's Road. Can't commentate on every building, but just give you a flavour of what this place is like, how it starts off really stratospherically posh at one end, and is still somewhat posh, certainly that side of the street, not quite so much the other side of the street, but certainly not dull, varied. There's a lot going on. I remember one of my Slovak friends said she didn't want to go shopping on Oxford Street this summer because it was so rammed there, so she far preferred to go shopping here on the King's Road. Ooh, we're coming up to the one I said seemed to be like one of the last Cockney pubs in London showing football. Here, Riley's, Irish, so not even Cockney. What kind of a way is that to spell Riley? But then again, ambulances screaming around, and maybe behind me you can see that round tower block. That's what I was talking about, part of the World's End estate. Maybe they're supers, because I heard that in the famine, when some Protestant missionaries offered people soup to sell their birthright to cross the Tiber, some people who became Protestants would deliberately change the spelling of their surname to show it. I don't know if that's true. Okay, so yeah, there's some more of those tower blocks, part of the World's End estate. We're not very far from, let me see, Chelsea football ground. Well, Stamford Bridge is the name of the stadium, and there really was a bridge there a long time ago. Not Stamford Bridge, as in the one in York, as in the Battle of 1066. Other thing about that place is actually Stamford Bridge Stadium is not in Chelsea. Strictly speaking, it's just over the line in Fulham. Ah, this is it, the World's End pub, but it's closed as usual. Thanks a lot. Anyway, I think that's enough. It's almost the end of the King's Road, and beyond this it just gets too unremarkable, so we shan't even bother. Okay, the World's End Distillery, and it's an ale house. Look up high. How about that? Certainly not bland. Okay, so that's all from the King's Road. Please send your suggestions of what else you'd like to see in London, and I know you want to make a handsome donation to me on PayPal, things like that. Okay, goodbye.